$1.6 trillion. That will be President Obama's opening bid for raising tax revenue when he sits down for deficit negotiations with House Republicans. Good morning. Welcome to the News Hub. I'm Rolf Winkler. That's more than the president has asked for in previous negotiations. And Republicans aren't happy and would prefer spending cuts, of course, to higher taxes. How it all shake out? Wall Street Journal's Janet Hook is in Washington, and she's here to lay down some odds. Maybe I can talk her into it. Janet, good morning.
Good morning.
So, first of all, $1.6 trillion. That is over a few questions with that. That's over 10 years, and that's more than the president has asked for in previous negotiations, correct?
That's not quite right. I mean, that is the number that he included in his 2013 budget.
Okay.
So, I mean, that is his opening bid is where he was last year when he put out his budget. And it is over 10 years. And what it amounts to is it's kind of like Obama's not going to make any preemptive concessions. He's going to start the negotiations with where he's been. In the middle of 2011, he was deep into private negotiations with John Boehner, and they had kind of come close to an agreement that would have included $800 billion in taxes over 10 years. And so that's more of a signal of what the Republicans would be willing to accept than it is of what Obama wants.
Okay.
So especially after an election that he won, and he felt very much on the campaign promise of wanting to raise taxes on the rich, it's not surprising that he wouldn't want to go straight back to that $800 billion figure.
Now, speaking of Republicans, Janet, they're poised to accept, like you said, some revenue increases, though there's still definitely disagreement over tax rates. And I want to, we had Tim Geithner at Wall Street Journal's CEO Council yesterday, and he said something pretty interesting. We want to roll that for everyone.
If you look at the amount of deficit reduction you have to put in place over the next 10 years, if you recognize what's a realistic share of revenues are going to have to contribute to that, and if you believe, as the president does, that we shouldn't be asking middle-class Americans to pay more in taxes, then I don't see how you do this without higher rates. Just don't think there's any feasible, realistic way to do it.
Republicans don't want higher tax rates. They kind of want revenues raised some other way. But we're talking now, Tim Geithner saying, look, we need higher rates, especially on the wealthy. How does that shake out?
Well, like I said, I think the Obama administration is going into these negotiations with a tough line. That's kind of what a good negotiator does. And I do think that probably they'll have to settle the only part of the question before the end of the year. I think the thing that the Republicans are encouraged about is while Secretary Geithner said that, and the White House Press Secretary Jay Carney has also kind of drilled down on that point that Obama is not going to sign any legislation that allows upper income rates to go down. I think they're encouraged by the fact that President Obama himself has talked more broadly about raising taxes on the wealthy, and he personally has not really drilled down since the election on the question of whether those additional revenues have to come by higher rates.
Okay. Now, there's also, speaking of the Wall Street Journal CEO Council, there's been some interesting feedback from there. You have a great quote. I want to read this from your A1 story today. This is from the CEO of Energy, David Crane. He said, a quote, "I think everyone just has this fear that they just do as they've done the last 4 years and lob grenades at each other." Is there, I mean, is that, look, is there, I guess I'm wondering, do you think we're going to get a deal? And is it going to be something that effectively maybe just deals with the fiscal cliff temporarily, or maybe we get a grand bargain that really does deal with the long-term deficit problem?
I will bet that we'll get some kind of deal that will avert the fiscal cliff. I think all the participants are probably going to hold out to the last minute, and we'll be holding on by our fingernails on the fiscal cliff. My guess is the betting is that what will happen is there'll be a short-term or a kind of a framework of a deal laid down by the end of the year with really big decisions put off until 2013. I mean, if there's going to be a comprehensive reform of the tax code and entitlement programs, that's not going to happen between now and December 31st. But I think there has to be enough of an agreement about where that's going before the two sides reach any kind of agreement on the fiscal cliff.
Speaking of entitlements, just last, Janet, let's talk a little bit about this. We've talked a lot about the revenues that the president is going to ask from Republicans, Republicans are going to ask for spending cuts, particularly entitlement cuts from Democrats. And it feels like President Obama is willing to cut entitlements to some degree, correct?
Right, and in fact, he already has proposed some cuts in Medicare in his budget. They've been much more at the margins and more focusing on kind of administrative and costs and providers than on benefits than the Republicans have been talking about. I don't think he's as resolute about having no entitlement cuts. It's just a question of how far he goes and whether he's willing to go anywhere near changing benefits. I mean, when he was talking to Boehner in those negotiations I referred to before in 2011, he did signal willingness to say, raise the retirement age for Medicare. And that's something that a lot of Democrats don't want to do unless they get a much bigger concession out of the Republicans on revenues.
Okay, and President Obama is going to be sitting down this week with Republicans later this week. Janet, thank you so much.